Chapter 8. The surrender was a bitter pill to swallow, but Marechal Pétain was an honorable man, a hero of the last war with Germany. Yes, he was old, but Vienne shared the belief that this only gave him a better perspective from which to judge their circumstances. He had fashioned a way for their men to come home, so it wouldn't be like the Great War. Vienne understood what Isabelle could not. Pétain had surrendered on behalf of France to save lives and preserve their nation and their way of life. It was true that the terms of this surrender were difficult. France had been divided into two zones. The occupied zone, the north half of the country and the coastal regions, including Carriveau, was to be taken over and governed by the Nazis. The great middle of the country, the land that lay below Paris and above the sea, would be the free zone, governed by a new French government in Vichy, led by Marechal Pétain himself, in collaboration with the Nazis. Immediately upon France's surrender, food became scarce. Laundry soap, unobtainable. Ration cards could not be counted upon. Phone service became unreliable, as did the mail. The Nazis effectively cut off communication between cities and towns. The only mail allowed was on official German postcards. But for Vienne, these were not the worst of the changes. Isabelle became impossible to live with. Several times since the surrender, while Vienne toiled to reconstruct and replant her garden and repair her damaged fruit trees, she had paused in her work and seen Isabelle standing at the back gate, staring up at the sky, as if some dark and horrible thing were headed this way. All Isabelle could talk about was the monstrosity of the Nazis and their determination to kill the French. She had no ability, of course, to hold her tongue, and since Vienne refused to listen, Sophie became her sister's audience, her acolyte. Isabelle filled poor Sophie's head with terrible images of what would happen, so much so that the child had nightmares. Vienne dared not leave the two of them alone, and so today, like each of the previous days, she made them both come to town with her to see what their ration cards would get them. They had been standing in a food queue at the butcher's shop for 2 hours already. Isabelle had been complaining nearly that whole time. Apparently, it made no sense to her that she should have to shop for food. "Viens, look," Isabelle said. More dramatics. "Viens, look." She turned, just to silence her sister, and saw them. Germans. Up and down the street, windows and doors slammed shut. People disappeared so quickly, Vienne found herself suddenly standing alone on the sidewalk with her sister and daughter. She grabbed Sophie and pulled her against the butcher shop's closed door. Isabelle stepped defiantly into the street. "Isabelle!" Vienne hissed. But Isabelle stood her ground, her green eyes bright with hatred, her pale, fine-boned, beautiful face marred by scratches and bruises. The green lorry in the lead came to a halt in front of Isabelle. In the back, soldiers sat on benches, facing one another, rifles laid casually across their laps. They looked young and clean-shaven and eager in brand-new helmets with medals glinting on their gray-green uniforms. Young, most of all. Not monsters, just boys, really. They craned their necks to see what had stopped traffic. At the sight of Isabelle standing there, the soldiers started to smile and wave. Vienne grabbed Isabelle's hand and yanked her out of the way. The military entourage rumbled past them, a string of vehicles and motorcycles and lorries covered in camouflaged netting. Armored tanks rolled thunderously on the cobblestone street. And then came the soldiers. 2 long lines of them, marching into town. Isabelle walked boldly alongside them up Rue Victor Hugo. The Germans waved to her, looking more like tourists than conquerors. "Maman, you can't let her go off by herself," Sophie said. "Merde!" Vienne clutched Sophie's hand and ran after Isabelle. They caught up with her in the next block. The town square, usually full of people, had practically emptied. Only a few townspeople dared to remain as the German vehicles pulled up in front of the town hall and parked. An officer appeared. Or Vianne assumed he was an officer because of the way he began barking orders. Soldiers marched around the large cobblestone square, claiming it with their overwhelming presence. They ripped down the flag of France and replaced it with their Nazi flag, a huge black swastika against a red and black background. When it was in place, the troops stopped as one, extended their right arms, and yelled, "Heil Hitler!" "If I had a gun," Isabel said, "I'd show them not all of us wanted to surrender." "Shh," Vianne said. "You'll get us all killed with that mouth of yours. Let's go." "No, I want—" Vianne spun to face Isabel. "Enough! You will not draw attention to us. Is that understood?" Isabel gave one last hate-filled glance at the marching soldiers and then let Vianne lead her away. They slipped from the main street and entered a dark cleft in the walls that led to a back alley behind the milliner's shop. They could hear the soldiers singing. Then a shot rang out, and another. Someone screamed. Isabel stopped. "Don't you dare," Vianne said. "Move." They kept to the dark alleys, ducking into doorways when they heard voices coming their way. It took longer than usual to get through town, but eventually they made it to the dirt road. They walked silently past the cemetery and all the way home. Once inside, Vianne slammed the door behind her and locked it. "You see?" Isabel said instantly. She had obviously been waiting to throw out the question. "Go to your room," Vianne said to Sophie. Whatever Isabel was going to say, she didn't want Sophie to hear. Vianne eased the hat from her head and set down her empty basket. Her hands were shaking. "They're here because of the airfield," Isabel said. She began pacing. "I didn't think it would happen so fast, even with the surrender. I didn't believe. I thought our soldiers would fight anyway. I thought—" "Quit biting your nails. You'll make them bleed, you know." Isabel looked like a madwoman, with her waist-length blonde hair falling loose from its braid and her bruised face twisted with fury. "The Nazis are here, Vianne, in Carivaux. Their flag flies from the Hôtel de Ville as it flies from the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. They weren't in town 5 minutes and a shot was fired. The war is over, Isabelle. Maréchal Pétain said so." "The war is over? The war is over? Did you see them back there, with their guns and their flags and their arrogance? We need to get out of here, Vi. We'll take Sophie and leave Carivaux." "And go where?" "Anywhere. Lyon, maybe. Provence. What was that town in the Dordogne where Maman was born? Brantôme. We could find her friend, that Basque woman. What was her name? She might help us." "You're giving me a headache." "A headache is the least of your problems," Isabel said, pacing again. Vianne approached her. "You are not going to do anything crazy or stupid. Am I understood?" Isabel growled in frustration and marched upstairs, slamming the door behind her. Surrender. The word stuck in Isabel's thoughts. That night, as she lay in the downstairs guest bedroom, staring up at the ceiling, she felt frustration lodge in her so deeply she could hardly think straight. Was she supposed to spend the war in this house like some helpless girl, doing laundry and standing in food lines and sweeping the floor? Was she to stand by and watch the enemy take everything from France? She had always felt lonely and frustrated, or at least she had felt it for as long as she could remember, but never as sharply as now. She was stuck here in the country with no friends and nothing to do. No. There must be something she could do, even here, even now. Hide the valuables. It was all that came to her. The Germans would loot the houses in town. Of that she had no doubt, and when they did, they would take everything of value. Her own government, cowards that they were, had known that. It was why they had emptied much of the Louvre and put fake paintings on the museum walls. "Not much of a plan," she muttered, but it was better than nothing. The next day, as soon as Vianne and Sophie left for school, Isabelle began. She ignored Vianne's request that she go to town for food. She couldn't stand to see the Nazis, and one day without meat would hardly matter. Instead, she searched the house, opening closets and rummaging through drawers and looking under the beds. She took every item of value and set it on the trestle table in the dining room. There were lots of valuable heirlooms: lacework tatted by her great-grandmother, a set of sterling silver salt and pepper shakers, a gilt-edged Limoges platter that had been their aunt's, several small impressionist paintings, a tablecloth made of fine ivory Alençon lace, several photograph albums, a silver-framed photograph of Vianne and Antoine and baby Sophie, her mother's pearls, Vianne's wedding dress, and more. Isabelle boxed up everything that would fit in a wooden-trimmed leather trunk, which she dragged through the trampled grass, wincing every time it scraped on a stone or thudded into something. By the time she reached the barn, she was breathing hard and sweating. The barn was smaller than she remembered. The hayloft, once the only place in the world where she was happy, was really just a small tier on the second floor, a bit of floor perched at the top of a rickety ladder and beneath the roof, through which slats of sky could be seen. How many hours had she spent up here alone with her picture books, pretending that someone cared enough to come looking for her, waiting for her sister, who was always out with Rachel or Antoine. She pushed that memory aside. The center of the barn was no more than 30 feet wide. It had been built by her great-grandfather to hold buggies, back when the family had money. Now there was only an old Renault parked in the center. The stalls were filled with tractor parts and web-draped wooden ladders and rusted farm implements. She closed the barn door and went to the automobile. The driver's side door opened with a squeaking, clattering reluctance. She climbed in, started the engine, drove forward about 8 feet, and then parked. The trap door was revealed now, about 5 feet long and 4 feet wide, and made of planks connected by leather straps. The cellar door was nearly impossible to see, especially as it was now, covered in dust and old hay. She pulled the trap door open, letting it rest against the automobile's dinged-up bumper, and peered down into the musty darkness. Holding the trunk by its strap, she turned on her torchlight and clamped it under her other armpit and climbed down the ladder slowly, clanking the trunk down, rung by rung, until she was at the bottom. The trunk clattered onto the dirt floor beside her. Like the loft, this hidey hole had seemed bigger to her as a child. It was about 8 feet wide and 10 feet long, with shelving along one side and an old mattress on the floor. The shelves used to hold barrels for winemaking, but a lantern was the only thing left on the shelves. She tucked the trunk into the back corner and then went back to the house, where she gathered up some preserved food, blankets, some medical supplies, her father's hunting shotgun, and a bottle of wine, all of which she put out on the shelves. When she climbed back up the ladder, she found Vianne in the barn. "What in the world are you doing out here?" Isabelle wiped her dusty hands on the worn cotton of her skirt. "Hiding your valuables and putting supplies down here, in case we need to hide from the Nazis. Come down and look. I did a good job, I think." She backed down the ladder, and Vianne followed her into the darkness. Lighting a lantern, Isabelle proudly showed off Papa's shotgun and the foodstuffs and medical supplies. Vianne went straight to their mother's jewelry box, opening it. Inside lay brooches and earrings and necklaces, mostly costume pieces. But at the bottom, lying on blue velvet, were the pearls that Grand-mère had worn on her wedding day and given to Maman to wear on her wedding day. "You may need to sell them someday," Isabel said. Vianne clamped the box shut. They are heirlooms, Isabel. For Sophie's wedding day and yours. I would never sell them. She sighed impatiently and turned to Isabel. What food were you able to get in town? I did this instead. Of course you did. It's more important to hide Maman's pearls than to feed your niece supper. Honestly, Isabel. Vianne climbed up the ladder, her displeasure revealed in tiny, disgusted huffs. Isabel left the cellar and drove the Renault back into place over the door. Then she hid the keys behind a broken board in one of the stalls. At the last moment, she disabled the automobile by removing the distributor cap. She hid it with the keys. When she finally returned to the house, Vianne was in the kitchen frying potatoes in a cast-iron skillet. I hope you aren't hungry. I'm not. She moved past Vianne, barely making eye contact. Oh, and I hid the keys and distributor cap in the first stall, behind a broken board. In the living room, she turned on the radio and scooted close, hoping for news from the BBC. There was a staticky crackle, and then an unfamiliar voice said, This is the BBC. General de Gaulle is speaking to you. Vianne! Isabel yelled toward the kitchen. Who is General de Gaulle? Vianne came into the living room, drying her hands on her apron. What is... Shh! Isabel snapped. The leaders who have been at the head of the French army for many years have formed a government. On the pretext that our army has been defeated, this government has approached the enemy with a view to ceasing hostilities. Isabel stared at the small wooden radio, transfixed. This man they'd never heard of spoke directly to the people of France, not at them as Pétain had done, but to them in an impassioned voice. Pretext of defeat! I knew it! We certainly have been and still are submerged by the mechanical strength of the enemy, both on land and in the air. The tanks, the aeroplanes, the tactics of the Germans astounded our generals to such an extent that they have been brought to the pain which they are in today. But has the last word been said? Has all hope disappeared? Is the defeat final? Mon Dieu! Isabel said. This was what she'd been waiting to hear. There was something to be done, a fight to engage in. The surrender wasn't final. Whatever happens, de Gaulle's voice went on, the flame of French resistance must not and shall not die. Isabel hardly noticed that she was crying. The French hadn't given up. Now all Isabel had to do was figure out how to answer this call. 2 days after the Nazis occupied Carrivaux, they called a meeting for the late afternoon. Everyone was to attend, no exceptions. Even so, Vianne had had to fight with Isabel to get her to come. As usual, Isabel did not think ordinary rules pertained to her, and she wanted to use defiance to show her displeasure. As if the Nazis cared what one impetuous 18-year-old girl thought of their occupation of her country. Wait here, Vianne said impatiently when she'd finally gotten Isabel and Sophie out of the house. She gently closed the broken gate behind them. It gave a little click of closure. Moments later, Rachel appeared on the road, coming toward them with the baby in her arms and Sarah at her side. That's my best friend Sarah, Sophie said, gazing up at Isabel. Isabel, Rachel said with a smile. It's good to see you again. Is it? Isabel said. Rachel moved closer to Isabel. That was a long time ago, Rachel said gently. We were young and stupid and selfish. I'm sorry we treated you badly, ignored you. That must have been very painful. Isabel's mouth opened, closed. For once she had nothing to say. Let's go, Vianne said, irritated that Rachel had said to Isabel what Vianne had not been able to. We shouldn't be late. Even this late in the day, the weather was unseasonably warm, and in no time Vianne felt herself beginning to sweat. In town, they joined the grumbling crowd that filled the narrow cobblestone street from storefront to storefront. The shops were closed, and the windows were shuttered, even though the heat would be unbearable when they got home. Most of the display cases were empty, which was hardly surprising. The Germans ate so much. Even worse, they left food on their plates in the cafes. Careless and cruel it was, with so many mothers beginning to count the jars in their cellars so that they could dole out every precious bite to their children. Nazi propaganda was everywhere, on windows and shop walls, posters that showed smiling German soldiers surrounded by French children, with captions designed to encourage the French to accept their conquerors and become good citizens of the Reich. As the crowd approached the town hall, the grumbling stopped. Up close, it felt even worse. This following of instructions, walking blindly into a place with guarded doors and locked windows. "We shouldn't go in," Isabel said. Rachel, who stood between the sisters, towering over both of them, made a tisking sound. She resettled the baby in her arms, patting his back in a comforting rhythm. "We have been summoned." "All the more reason to hide," Isabel said. "Sophie and I are going in," Vianne said, although she had to admit that she felt a prickly sense of foreboding. "I have a bad feeling about it," Isabel muttered. Like a 1,000-legged centipede, the crowd moved forward into the great hall. Tapestries had once hung from these walls, leftover treasures from the time of kings, when the Loire Valley had been the royal hunting ground. But all that was gone now. Instead, there were swastikas and propagandist posters on the walls. "Trust in the Reich," and a huge painting of Hitler. Beneath the painting stood a man wearing a black field tunic decorated with medals and iron crosses, knee breeches, and spit-shined boots. A red swastika armband circled his right bicep. When the hall was full, the soldiers closed the oak doors, which creaked in protest. The officer at the front of the hall faced them, shot his right arm out, and said, "Heil Hitler!" The crowd murmured softly among themselves. What should they do? "Heil Hitler," a few said grudgingly. The room began to smell of sweat and leather polish and cigarette smoke. "I am Sturmbannführer Weld, of the Geheime Staatspolizei, the Gestapo," the man in the black uniform said in heavily accented French. "I am here to carry out the terms of the armistice on behalf of the fatherland and the Führer. It will be of little hardship on those of you who obey the rules." He cleared his throat. "The rules. All radios are to be turned into us at the town hall immediately, as are all guns, explosives, and ammunition. All operational vehicles will be impounded. All windows will be equipped with material for blackout, and you shall use it. A 9 p.m. curfew is instantly in effect. No light shall be on after dusk. We will control all food, whether grown or imported." He paused, looked out over the mass of people standing in front of him. "Not so bad, see? We will live together in harmony, yes? But know this. Any act of sabotage or espionage or resistance will be dealt with swiftly and without mercy. The punishment for such behavior is death by execution." He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his breast pocket and extracted a single cigarette. Lighting it, he stared out at the people so intently it seemed he was memorizing each face. "Also, although many of your ragged, cowardly soldiers are returning, we must inform you that the men taken prisoner by us shall remain in Germany." Vianne felt confusion ripple through the audience. She looked at Rachel, whose square face was blotchy in places, a sign of anxiety. "Mark and Antoine will come home," Rachel said stubbornly. The Sturmbannführer went on. "You may leave now, as I am sure we understand each other. I will have officers here until 8:45 tonight. They will receive your contraband. Do not be late. And," he smiled good-naturedly, "do not risk your lives to keep a radio. Whatever you keep or hide, we will find, and if we find it, death." He said it so casually and wearing such a fine smile that for a moment it didn't sink in. The crowd stood there a moment longer, uncertain whether it was safe to move. No one wanted to be seen as taking the first step. And then suddenly, they were moving, pack-like, toward the open doors that led them outside. "Bastards!" Isabel said as they moved into an alley. "And I was so sure they'd let us keep our guns," Rachel said, lighting up a cigarette, inhaling deeply and exhaling in a rush. "I'm keeping our gun, I can tell you," Isabel said in a loud voice. "And our radio." "Shh," Vian said. "General de Gaulle thinks—" "I don't want to hear that foolishness. We have to keep our heads down until our men come home," Vian said. "Mon Dieu," Isabel said sharply. "You think your husband can fix this?" "No," Vian said. "I believe you will fix it, you and your General de Gaulle, of whom no one has ever heard. Now come. While you are hatching a plan to save France, I need to tend to my garden. Come on, Rachel, let us dullards be away." Vian held tightly to Sophie's hand and walked briskly ahead. She did not bother to glance back to see if Isabel was following. She knew her sister was back there, hobbling forward on her damaged feet. Ordinarily, Vian would keep pace with her sister out of politeness, but just now she was too mad to care. "Your sister may not be so wrong," Rachel said as they passed the Norman church on the edge of town. "If you take her side in this, I may be forced to hurt you, Rachel." "That being said, your sister may not be entirely wrong." Vian sighed. "Don't tell her that. She's unbearable already." "She will have to learn propriety." "You teach her. She has proven singularly resistant to improving herself or listening to reason. She's been to 2 finishing schools and still can't hold her tongue or make polite conversation. 2 days ago, instead of going to town for meat, she hid the valuables and created a hiding place for us, just in case. I should probably hide mine, too. Not that we have much." Vian pursed her lips. There was no point in talking further about this. Soon Antoine would be home, and he would help keep Isabel in line. At the gate to Le Jardin, Vian said goodbye to Rachel and her children, who kept walking. "Why do we have to give them our radio, Maman?" Sophie asked. "It belongs to Papa." "We don't," Isabel said, coming up beside them. "We will hide it." "We will not hide it," Vian said sharply. "We will do as we are told and keep quiet, and soon Antoine will be home, and he will know what to do." "Welcome to the Middle Ages, Sophie," Isabel said. Vian yanked her gate open, forgetting a second too late that the refugees had broken it. The poor thing clattered on its single hinge. It took all of Vian's fortitude to act as if it hadn't happened. She marched up to the house, opened the door, and immediately turned on the kitchen light. "Sophie," she said, unpinning her hat, "would you please set the table?" Vian ignored her daughter's grumbling. It was to be expected. In only a few days, Isabel had taught her niece to challenge authority. Vian lit the stove and started cooking. When a creamy potato and lardon soup was simmering, she began to clean up. Of course, Isabel was nowhere around to help. Sighing, she filled the sink with water to wash dishes. She was so intent on her task that it took her a moment to notice that someone was knocking on the front door. Patting her hair, she walked into the living room, where she found Isabel rising from the divan, a book in her hands. Reading while Vian cooked and cleaned. Naturally. "Are you expecting anyone?" Isabel asked. Vian shook her head. "Maybe we shouldn't answer," Isabel said. "Pretend we're not here." "It's most likely Rachel." There was another knock at the door. Slowly, the doorknob turned, and the door creaked open. Yes, of course it was Rachel. Who else would? A German soldier stepped into her home. "Oh, my pardons," the man said in terrible French. He removed his military hat, tucked it in his armpit, and smiled. He was a good-looking man, tall and broad-shouldered and narrow-hipped, with pale skin and light gray eyes. Vian guessed he was roughly her age. His field uniform was precisely pressed and looked brand new. An iron cross decorated his stand-up collar. Binoculars hung from a strap around his neck, and a chunky leather utility belt cinched his waist. Behind him, through the branches of the orchard, she saw his motorcycle parked on the side of the road. A sidecar was attached to it, mounted with machine guns. "Mademoiselle," he said to Vian, giving her a swift nod as he clicked his boots together. "Madame," she corrected him, wishing she sounded haughty and in control, but even to her own ears she sounded scared. "Madame Mauriac." "I am Hauptmann, Captain Wolfgang Beck." He handed her a piece of paper and clicked his heels together again. "My French is not so good. You will excuse my ineptitude, please." When he smiled, deep dimples formed in his cheeks. She took the paper and frowned down at it. "I don't read German." "What do you want?" Isabel demanded, coming to stand by Vian. "Your home is most beautiful and very close to the airfield. I noticed it upon our arrival. How many bedrooms have you?" "Why?" Isabel said at the same time Vian said, 3. "I will billet here," the captain said in his bad French. "Billet?" Vian said. "You mean to stay?" "Oui, madame." "Billet? You? A man? A Nazi? No. No." Isabel shook her head. "No." The captain's smile neither faded nor fell. "You were to town," he said, looking at Isabel. "I saw you when we arrived." "You noticed me?" He smiled. "I am sure every red-blooded man in my regiment noticed you." "Funny you would mention blood," Isabel said. Vian elbowed her sister. "I am sorry, Captain. My young sister is obstinate on occasion. But I am married, you see, and my husband is at the front, and there is my sister and my daughter here, so you must see how inappropriate it would be to have you here." "Ah, so you would rather leave the house to me. How difficult that must be for you." "Leave?" Vian said. "I believe you aren't understanding the captain," Isabel said, not taking her gaze from him. "He's moving into your home, taking it over, really, and that piece of paper is a requisition order that makes it possible. And Pétain's armistice, of course. We can either make room for him or abandon a home that has been in our family for generations." He looked uncomfortable. "This, I'm afraid, is the situation. Many of your fellow villagers are facing the same dilemma, I fear." "If we leave, will we get our home back?" Isabel asked. "I would not think so, madame." Vian dared to take a step toward him. Perhaps she could reason with him. "My husband will be home any day now, I imagine. Perhaps you could wait until he is here?" "I am not the general, alas. I am simply a captain in the Wehrmacht. I follow orders, madame. I do not give them. And I am ordered to billet here. But I assure you that I am a gentleman." "We will leave," Isabel said. "Leave?" Vian said to her sister in disbelief. "This is my home." To the captain she said, "I can count on you to be a gentleman?" "Of course." Vian looked at Isabel, who shook her head slowly. Vian knew there was no real choice. She had to keep Sophie safe until Antoine came home, and then he would handle this unpleasantness. Surely he would be home soon, now that the armistice had been signed. "There is a small bedroom downstairs. You'll be comfortable there." The captain nodded. "Merci, madame. I will get my things." As soon as the door closed behind the captain, Isabel said, "Are you mad? We can't live with a Nazi." "He said he's in the Wehrmacht. Is that the same thing?" "I'm hardly interested in their chain of command. You haven't seen what they're willing to do to us, Vian. I have. We'll leave. Go next door, to Rachel's. We could live with her." "Rachel's house is too small for all of us, and I am not going to abandon my home to the Germans." To that, Isabel had no answer. Vian felt anxiety turn to an itch along her throat. An old nervous habit returned. "You go if you must, but I'm waiting for Antoine. We have surrendered, so he'll be home soon." "Vian, please." The front door rattled hard. Another knock. Vian walked dully forward. With a shaking hand, she reached for the knob and opened the door. Captain Beck stood there, holding his military hat in one hand and a small leather valise in the other. He said, "Hello again, madame," as if he'd been gone for some time. Vian scratched at her neck, feeling acutely vulnerable beneath this man's gaze. She backed away quickly, saying, "This way, Herr Captain." As she turned, she saw the living room that had been decorated by 3 generations of her family's women. Golden stucco walls, the color of freshly baked brioche, gray stone floors covered by ancient Aubusson rugs, heavily carved wooden furniture upholstered in mohair and tapestry fabric, lamps made of porcelain, curtains of gold and red toile, antiques and treasures left over from the years when the Rossignols had been wealthy tradesmen. Until recently, there had been artwork on the walls. Now only the unimportant pieces remained. Isabel had hidden the good ones. Vian walked past all of it to the small guest bedroom tucked beneath the stairs. At the closed door, to the left of the bathroom that had been added in the early 20s, she paused. She could hear him breathing behind her. She opened the door to reveal a narrow room with a large window, bracketed by blue-gray curtains that pooled on the wooden floor. A painted chest of drawers supported a blue pitcher and ewer. In the corner was an aged oak armoire with mirrored doors. By the double bed sat a nightstand. On it, an antique ormolu clock. Isabel's clothes lay everywhere, as if she were packing for an extended holiday. Vian picked them up quickly, and the valise, too. When she finished, she turned. His suitcase plunked to the floor. She looked at him, compelled by simple politeness to offer a tense smile. "You needn't worry, madame," he said gently. "We have been admonished to act as gentlemen. My mother would demand the same, and in truth, she scares me more than my general." It was such an ordinary remark that Vian was taken aback. She had no idea how to respond to this stranger who dressed like the enemy and looked like a young man she might have met at church. And what was the price for saying the wrong thing? He remained where he was, a respectful distance from her. "I apologize for any inconvenience, madame." "My husband will be home soon." "We all hope to be home soon." Another unnerving comment. Vian nodded politely and left him alone in the room, closing the door behind her. "Tell me he's not staying," Isabel said, rushing at her. "He says he is," Vian said tiredly, pushing back the hair from her eyes. She realized just now that she was trembling. "I know how you feel about these Nazis. Just make sure he doesn't know it. I won't let you put Sophie at risk with your childish rebellion." "Childish rebellion? Are you?" The guest room door opened, silencing Isabel. Captain Beck strode confidently toward them, smiling broadly. Then he saw the radio in the room and he paused. "Do not worry, ladies. I am most pleased to deliver your radio to the Commandant." Really? Isabel said. You consider this a kindness? Vianne felt a tightening in her chest. There was a storm brewing in Isabel. Her sister's cheeks had gone pale. Her lips were drawn in a thin, colorless line. Her eyes were narrowed. She was glaring at the German as if she could kill him with a look. Of course. He smiled, looking a little confused. The sudden silence seemed to unnerve him. Suddenly he said, You have beautiful hair, mademoiselle. At Isabel's frown, he said, This is an appropriate compliment, yes? Do you think so? Isabel said, her voice low. Quite lovely. Beck smiled. Isabel walked into the kitchen and came back with a pair of boning shears. His smile faded. Am I misunderstood? Vianne said, Isabel, don't. Just as Isabel gathered up her thick blonde hair and fisted it. Staring grimly at Captain Beck's handsome face, she hacked off her hair and handed the long blonde tail to him. It must be verboten for us to have anything beautiful, is it not, Captain Beck? Vianne gasped. Please, sir, ignore her. Isabel is a silly, prideful girl. No, Beck said. She is angry, and angry people make mistakes in war and die. So do conquering soldiers, Isabel snapped. Beck laughed at her. Isabel made a sound that was practically a snarl and pivoted on her heel. She marched up the stairs and slammed the door shut so hard the house shook. You will want to speak to her now, I warrant, Beck said. He looked at Vianne in a way that made it seem as if they understood each other. Such theatrics in the wrong place could be most dangerous. Vianne left him standing in her living room and went upstairs. She found Isabel sitting on Sophie's bed, so angry she was shaking. Scratches marred her cheeks and throat, a reminder of what she'd seen and survived, and now her hair was hacked off, the ends uneven. Vianne tossed Isabel's belongings onto the unmade bed and closed the door behind her. What in the name of all that's holy were you thinking? I could kill him in his sleep, just slit his throat. And do you think they would not come looking for a captain who had orders to billet here? Mon Dieu, Isabelle. She took a deep breath to calm her racing nerves. I know there are problems between us, Isabelle. I know I treated you badly as a child. I was too young and scared to help you, and Papa treated you worse. But this is not about us now, and you can't be the girl who acts impetuously anymore. It is about my daughter now, your niece. We must protect her. But France has surrendered, Isabelle. Certainly this fact has not escaped you. Didn't you hear General de Gaulle? He said... And who is this General de Gaulle? Why should we listen to him? Maréchal Pétain is a war hero and our leader. We have to trust our government. Are you joking, Vianne? The government in Vichy is collaborating with Hitler. How can you not understand this danger? Pétain is wrong. Does one follow a leader blindly? Vianne moved toward Isabel slowly, half afraid of her now. You don't remember the last war, she said, clasping her hands to still them. I do. I remember the fathers and brothers and uncles who didn't come home. I remember hearing children in my class cry quietly when bad news came by telegram. And I remember the men who came home on crutches, their pant legs empty and flapping, or one arm gone, or a face ruined. I remember how Papa was before the war, and how different he was when he came home, how he drank and slammed doors and screamed at us, and then when he stopped. I remember the stories about Verdun and Somme and a million Frenchmen dying in trenches that ran red with blood. And the German atrocities, don't forget that part of it. They were cruel, Isabelle. That's my point exactly. We must... They were cruel because we were at war with them, Isabelle. Pétain has saved us from going through that again. He has kept us safe. He has stopped the war. Now Antoine and all our men will come home." "To a Heil Hitler world?" Isabel said with a sneer. "The flame of French resistance must not and shall not die. That's what de Gaulle said. We have to fight however we can, for France vie, so it stays France." "Enough," Vianne said. She moved close enough that she could have whispered to Isabel or kissed her, but Vianne did neither. In a steady, even voice, she said, "You will take Sophie's room upstairs and she will move in with me. And remember this, Isabel. He could shoot us, and no one would care. You will not provoke this soldier in my home." She saw the words hit home. Isabel stiffened. "I will try to hold my tongue." "Do more than try." Chapter 9. Vianne closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, trying to calm her nerves. She could hear Isabel pacing in the room behind her, moving with an anger that made the floorboards tremble. How long did Vianne stand there alone, trembling, trying to get her nerves under control? It felt like hours passed while she struggled with her fear. In ordinary times, she would have found the strength to talk rationally with her sister, to say some of the things that had long been unspoken. Vianne would have told Isabel how sorry she was for the way she'd treated her as a little girl. Maybe she could have made Isabel understand. Vianne had been so helpless after Maman's death. When Papa had sent them away, to live in this small town, beneath the cold, stern eyes of a woman who had shown the girls no love, Vianne had wilted. In another time, she might have shared with Isabel what they had in common, how undone she'd been by Maman's death, how Papa's rejection had broken her heart, or how he'd treated her at 16 when she'd come to him pregnant and in love and been slapped across the face and called a disgrace, how Antoine had pushed Papa back hard and said, "I'm going to marry her," and Papa's answer, "Fine, she's all yours. You can have the house, but you'll take her squalling sister too." Vianne closed her eyes. She hated to think about all of that. For years she'd practically forgotten it. Now how could she push it aside? She had done to Isabel exactly what their father had done to them. It was the greatest regret of Vianne's life. But this was not the time to repair that damage. Now she had to do everything in her power to keep Sophie safe until Antoine came home. Isabel would simply have to be made to understand that. With a sigh, she went downstairs to check on supper. In the kitchen, she found her potato soup simmering a bit too briskly, so she uncovered it and lowered the heat. "Madame, are you sanguine?" She flinched at the sound of his voice. When had he come in here? She took a deep breath and patted her hair. It was not the word he meant. Really, his French was terrible. "That smells delicious," he said, coming up behind her. She set the wooden spoon down on the rest beside the stove. "May I see what you are making?" "Of course," she said, both of them pretending her wishes mattered. "It's just potato soup." "My wife, hélas, is not much of a cook." He was right beside her now, taking Antoine's place, a hungry man peering down at a cooking dinner. "You are married," she said, reassured by it, although she couldn't say why. "And a baby soon to be born. We are planning to call him Wilhelm, although I will not be there when he is born, and of course such decisions must inevitably be his mother's." It was such a human thing to say. She found herself turning slightly to look at him. He was her height, almost exactly, and it unnerved her. Looking directly into his eyes made her feel vulnerable. "God willing, we will all be home soon," he said. He wants this over too, she thought, with relief. "It's supper time, Herr Captain. Will you be joining us?" "It would be an honor, madame. Although you will be pleased to hear that most evenings I will be working late and enjoying my supper with the officers. I shall also often be out on campaigns. You shall sometimes hardly notice my presence." Vianne left him in the kitchen and carried silverware into the dining room, where she almost ran into Isabel. "You shouldn't be alone with him," Isabel hissed. The captain came into the room. "You cannot think I would accept your hospitality and then do harm. Consider this night. I have brought you wine, a lovely Sancerre." "You brought us wine," Isabel said. "As any good guest would," he answered. Vianne thought, "Oh no," but there was nothing she could do to stop Isabel from speaking. "You know about Tours, Herr Captain?" Isabel asked. "How your Stukas fired on innocent women and children who were fleeing for their lives and dropped bombs on us?" "Us?" he said, his expression turning thoughtful. "I was there. You see the marks on my face." "Ah," he said, "that must have been most unpleasant." Isabel went very still. The green of her eyes seemed to blaze against the red marks and bruises on her pale skin. "Unpleasant." "Think about Sophie," Vianne reminded her evenly. Isabel gritted her teeth, and then turned it into a fake smile. "Here, Captain Beck, let me show you to your seat." Vianne took her first decent breath in at least an hour. Then, slowly, she headed into the kitchen to dish up supper. Vianne served supper in silence. The atmosphere at the table was as heavy as coal soot, settling on all of them. It frayed Vianne's nerves to the breaking point. Outside, the sun began to set. Pink light filled the windows. "Would you care for wine, mademoiselle?" Beck said to Isabel, pouring himself a large glass of the Sancerre he had brought to the table. "If ordinary French families can't afford to drink it, Herr Captain, how can I enjoy it?" "A sip, perhaps, would not be—" Isabel finished her soup and got to her feet. "Excuse me, I'm feeling sick to my stomach." "Me too," Sophie said. She got to her feet and followed her aunt out of the room like a puppy follows the lead dog, with her head down. Vianne sat perfectly still, her soup spoon held above her bowl. They were leaving her alone with him. Her breathing was a flutter in her chest. She carefully set down her spoon and dabbed at her mouth with her serviette. "Forgive my sister, Herr Captain. She is impetuous and willful." "My oldest daughter is such a girl. We expect nothing but trouble when she gets a little older." That surprised Vianne so much that she turned. "You have a daughter?" "Gisela," he said, his mouth curving into a smile. "She is 6, and already her mother is unable to get her to reliably do the simplest of tasks, like brush her teeth. Our Gisela would rather build a fort than read a book." He sighed, smiling. It flustered her, knowing this about him. She tried to think of a response, but her nerves were too overwrought. She picked up her spoon and began eating again. The meal seemed to go on forever, in a silence that was her undoing. The moment he finished, saying, "A lovely meal, my thanks," she got to her feet and began clearing the table. Thankfully, he didn't follow her into the kitchen. He remained in the dining room, at the table by himself, drinking the wine he'd brought, which she knew would have tasted of autumn, pears and apples. By the time she'd washed and dried the dishes and put them away, night had fallen. She left the house, stepping into the starlit front yard for a moment's peace. On the stone garden wall, a shadow moved. It was a cat, perhaps. Behind her, she heard a footfall, then a match strike and the smell of sulfur. She took a quiet step backward, wanting to melt into the shadows. If she could move quietly enough, Perhaps she could return by the side door without alerting him to her presence. She stepped on a twig, heard it snap beneath her heel, and she froze. He stepped out from the orchard. "Madame," he said, "so you love the starlight also? I am sorry to intrude upon you." She was afraid to move. He closed the distance between them, taking up a place beside her as if he belonged there, looking out across her orchard. "You would never know there is a war on out here," he said. Vianne thought he sounded sad, and it reminded her that they were alike in a way, both of them far away from the people they loved. "Your superior, he said that all prisoners of war will remain in Germany. What does this mean? What of our soldiers? Surely you did not capture all of them?" "I do not know, madame. Some will return, many will not." "Well, isn't this a lovely little moment between new friends?" Isabel said, her voice as sharp as cut steel. Vianne flinched, horrified that she'd been caught standing out here with a German, the enemy, a man. Isabel stood in the moonlight, wearing a caramel-colored suit. She held her valise in one hand and Vianne's best Deauville in the other. "You have my hat," Vianne said. "I may have to wait for a train. My face is still tender from the Nazi attack." She was smiling at Beck as she said this. It wasn't really a smile. Beck inclined his head in a curt nod. "You have sisterly things to discuss, obviously. I will take my leave." With a brisk, polite nod, he returned to the house, closing the door behind him. "I can't stay here," Isabel said. "Of course you can. I have no interest in making friends with the enemy, V." "Damn it, Isabel. Don't you dare." Isabel stepped closer. "I'll put you and Sophie at risk, sooner or later. You know I will. You told me I needed to protect Sophie. This is the only way I can do it. I feel like I'll explode if I stay, V." Vianne's anger dissolved. Without it, she felt inexpressibly tired. This essential difference had always been between them. Vianne, the rule follower, and Isabel, the rebel. Even in girlhood, in grief, they had expressed their emotions differently. Vianne had gone silent after Maman's death, tried to pretend that Papa's abandonment didn't wound her, while Isabel had thrown tantrums and run away and demanded attention. Maman had sworn that one day they would be the best of friends. Never had this prediction seemed less likely. In this right now, Isabel was right. Vianne would be constantly afraid of what her sister would say or do around the captain, and truthfully, Vianne hadn't the strength for it. "How will you go? And where?" "Train. To Paris. I'll telegram you when I arrive safely." "Be careful. Don't do anything foolish." "Me? You know better than that." Vianne pulled Isabel into a fierce embrace and then let her go. The road to town was so dark, Isabel couldn't see her own feet. It was preternaturally quiet, suspenseful as a held breath, until she came to the airfield. There, she heard boots marching on hard-packed dirt, motorcycles and trucks rolling alongside the skein of barbed wire that now protected the ammunitions dump. A lorry appeared out of nowhere, its headlamps off, thundering up the road. She lurched out of its way, stumbling into the ditch. In town, it was no easier to navigate with the shops closed and the street lamps off and the windows blacked out. The silence was eerie and unnerving. Her footsteps seemed too loud. With every step, she was aware that a curfew was in effect and she was violating it. She ducked into one of the alleys, feeling her way along the rough sidewalk, her fingertips trailing along the storefronts for guidance. Whenever she heard voices, she froze, shrinking into the shadows until silence returned. It seemed to take forever to reach her destination, the train station on the edge of town. "Halt!" Isabel heard the word at the same time a floodlight sprayed white light over her. She was a shadow hunched beneath it. A German sentry approached her, his rifle held in his arms. "You are just a girl," he said, drawing close. "You know about the curfew, yeah?" he demanded. She rose slowly, facing him with a courage she didn't feel. "I know we aren't allowed to be out this late. It's an emergency, though. I must go to Paris. My father is ill." "Where is your Ausweis?" "I don't have one." He eased the rifle off his shoulder and into his hands. "No travel without an Ausweis." "But—" "Go home, girl, before you get hurt." "But—" "Now, before I decide not to ignore you." Inside, Isabel was screaming in frustration. It took considerable effort to walk away from the sentry without saying anything. On the way home, she didn't even keep to the shadows. She flaunted her disregard of the curfew, daring them to stop her again. A part of her wanted to get caught so she could let loose the string of invective screaming inside her head. This could not be her life. Trapped in a house with a Nazi in a town that had given up without a whimper of protest. Vianne was not alone in her desire to pretend that France had neither surrendered nor been conquered. In town, the shopkeepers and bistro owners smiled at the Germans and poured them champagne and sold them the best cuts of meat. The villagers, peasants mostly, shrugged and went on with life. Oh, they muttered disapprovingly and shook their heads and gave out wrong directions when asked. But beyond those small rebellions, there was nothing. No wonder the German soldiers were swollen with arrogance. They had taken over this town without a fight. Hell, they had done the same thing to all of France. But Isabel could never forget what she'd seen in the field near Tours. At home, when she was upstairs again, in the bedroom that had been hers as a child, she slammed the door shut behind her. A few moments later, she smelled cigarette smoke, and it made her so angry she wanted to scream. He was down there smoking a cigarette. Captain Beck, with his cut-stone face and fake smile, could toss them all out of this house at will. For any reason or no reason at all. Her frustration curdled into an anger that was like nothing she'd ever known. She felt as if her insides were a bomb that needed to go off. One wrong move or word, and she might explode. She marched over to Vianne's bedroom and opened the door. "You need a pass to leave town," she said, her anger expanding. "The bastards won't let us take a train to see family." From the darkness, Vianne said, "So that's that." Isabel didn't know if it was relief or disappointment she heard in her sister's voice. "Tomorrow you will go to town for me. You will stand in the queues while I am at school and get what you can." "But—" "No buts, Isabel. You are here now and staying. It's time you pulled your weight. I need to be able to count on you." For the next week, Isabel tried to be on her best behavior. But it was impossible with that man living under the same roof. Night after night she didn't sleep. She lay in her bed, alone in the dark, imagining the worst. This morning, well before dawn, she gave up the pretense and got out of bed. She washed her face and dressed in a plain cotton day dress, wrapping a scarf around her butchered hair as she went downstairs. Vianne sat on the divan, knitting, an oil lamp lit beside her. In the ring of lamplight that separated her from the darkness, Vianne looked pale and sickly. She obviously hadn't slept much this week either. She looked up at Isabel in surprise. "You're up early." "I have a long day of standing in lines ahead of me. Might as well get started," Isabel said. "The first in line gets the best food." Vianne put her knitting aside and stood, smoothing her dress, another reminder that he was in the house. Neither of them came downstairs in night dresses. She went into the kitchen and then returned with ration cards. "It's meat today." Isabel grabbed the ration cards from Vianne and left the house, plunging into the darkness of a blacked-out world. Dawn rose as she walked, illuminating a world within a world, one that looked like Carriveau but felt entirely foreign. As she passed the airfield, a small green car with the letters POL on the rear roared past her. Gestapo. The airfield was already a hive of activity. She saw 4 guards out front, 2 at the newly constructed gated entrance, and 2 at the building's double doors. Nazi flags snapped in the early morning breeze. Several aeroplanes stood ready for takeoff to drop bombs on England and across Europe. Guards marched in front of red signs that read, "Verboten," keep out under penalty of death. She kept walking. There were already 4 women queued up in front of the butcher's shop when she arrived. She took her place at the back of the line. That was when she saw a piece of chalk lying in the road, tucked in against the curb. She knew instantly how she could use it. She glanced around, but no one was looking at her. Why would they be, when there were German soldiers everywhere? Men in uniform strode through town like peacocks buying whatever caught their eye. Rambunctious and loud and quick to laugh. They were unfailingly polite, opening doors for women and tipping their hats, but Isabel wasn't fooled. She bent down and palmed the bit of chalk, hiding it in her pocket. It felt dangerous and wonderful just having it. She tapped her foot impatiently after that, waiting for her turn. "Good morning," she said, offering her ration card to the butcher's wife, a tired-looking woman with thinning hair and even thinner lips. "Ham hocks, 2 pounds, that's what is left." "Bones?" "The Germans take all the good meat, mademoiselle. You're lucky, in fact. Pork is verboten for the French, don't you know, but they don't want the hocks. Do you want them or not?" "I'll take them," someone said behind her. "So will I," yelled another woman. "I'll take them," Isabel said. She took the small packet, wrapped up in wrinkled paper and tied with twine. Across the street, she heard the sound of jackboots marching on cobblestone, the rattling of sabers in scabbards, the sound of male laughter, and the purring voices of the French women who warmed their beds. A trio of German soldiers sat at a bistro table not far away. "Mademoiselle," one of them said, waving to her, "come have coffee with us." She clutched her willow basket with its paper-wrapped treasures, small and insufficient as they were, and ignored the soldiers. She slipped around the corner and into an alley that was narrow and crooked, like all such passageways in town. Entrances were slim, and from the street they appeared to be dead ends. Locals knew how to navigate them as easily as a boatman knows a boggy river. She walked forward, unobserved. The shops in the alley had all been shut down. A poster in the abandoned milliner's shop window showed a crooked old man with a huge hooked nose, looking greedy and evil, holding a bag of money and trailing blood and bodies behind him. She saw the word, Juif, Jew, and stopped. She knew she should keep walking. It was just propaganda after all, the enemy's heavy-handed attempt to blame the Jewish people for the ills of the world and this war. And yet... She glanced to her left. Not 50 feet away was Rue La Grande, a main street through town. To her right was an elbow bend in the alleyway. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her piece of chalk. When she was sure the coast was clear, she drew a huge V for victory on the poster, obliterating as much of the image as she could. Someone grabbed her wrist so hard she gasped. Her piece of chalk fell, clattered to the cobblestones, and rolled into one of the cracks. "Mademoiselle," a man said, shoving her against the poster she'd just defaced, pressing her cheek into the paper so that she couldn't see him. "Do you know it is verboten to do that? And punishable by death?" Chapter 10. Vianne closed her eyes and thought, "Hurry home, Antoine." It was all she allowed herself, just that one small plea. How could she handle all of this? War, and Captain Beck, and Isabel, alone. She wanted to daydream, pretend that her world was upright instead of fallen on its side, that the closed guest room door meant nothing, that Sophie had slept with Vianne last night because they'd fallen asleep reading, that Antoine was outside on this dewy dawn morning, chopping wood for a winter that was still months away. Soon he would come in and say, "Well, I am off to a day of delivering mail." Perhaps he would tell her of his latest postmark, a letter in from Africa or America, and he would spin her a romantically imagined tale to go along with it. Instead, she returned her knitting to the basket by the divan, put on her boots, and went outside to chop wood. It would be autumn again in no time, and then winter, and the devastation of her garden by the refugees had reminded her how perilously balanced her survival was. She lifted the axe and brought it down, hard. Grasp. Raise. Steady. Chop. Every chop reverberated up her arms and lodged painfully in the muscles of her shoulders. Sweat squeezed from her pores, dampened her hair. "Allow me, please, to do this for you." She froze, the axe in mid-air. Beck stood nearby, dressed in his breeches and boots, with only a thin white t-shirt covering his chest. His pale cheeks were reddened from a morning shave, and his blonde hair was wet. Droplets fell onto his t-shirt, making a pattern of small gray sunbursts. She felt acutely uncomfortable in her robe and work boots, with her hair pinned in curls. She lowered the axe. "There are some things a man does around the house. You are much too fragile to chop wood." "I can do it." "Of course you can, but why should you? Go, madame. See to your daughter. I can do this small thing for you. Otherwise my mother will beat me with a switch." She meant to move, but somehow she didn't. And then he was there, pulling the axe gently out of her hand. She held on instinctively for a moment. Their gazes met, held. She released her hold and stepped back so quickly she stumbled. He caught her by the wrist, steadied her. Mumbling a thank you, she turned and walked away from him, keeping her spine as straight as she could. It took all of her limited courage not to speed up. Even so, by the time she reached the door, she felt as if she'd run from Paris. She kicked free of the oversized gardening boots, saw them hit the house with a thunk and fall in a heap. The last thing she wanted was kindness from this man who had invaded her home. She slammed the door shut behind her and went to the kitchen, where she lit the stove and put a pot of water on to boil. Then she went to the bottom of the stairs and called her daughter down for breakfast. She had to call 2 more times, and then threaten, before Sophie came trudging down the stairs, her hair a mess, the look in her eyes sullen. She was wearing her sailor dress, again. In the 10 months Antoine had been gone, she'd outgrown it, but she refused to stop wearing it. "I'm up," she said, shuffling to the table, taking her seat. Vianne placed a bowl of cornmeal mush in front of her daughter. She had splurged this morning and added a tablespoon of preserved peaches on top. "Maman, can't you hear that? There's someone knocking at the door." Vianne shook her head. All she'd heard was the thunk, thunk, thunk of the axe, and went to the door, opening it. Rachel stood there, with the baby in her arms, and Sarah tucked in close to her side. "You are teaching today with your hair pinned?" "Oh!" Vianne felt like a fool. What was wrong with her? Today was the last day of school before the summer break. "Let's go, Sophie. We are late." She rushed back inside and cleared the table. Sophie had licked her plate clean, so Vianne laid it in the copper sink to wash later. She covered the leftover pot of mush and put the preserved peaches away. Then she ran upstairs to get ready. In no time, she had removed her hairpins and combed her hair into smooth waves. She grabbed her hat, gloves, and handbag and left the house to find Rachel and the children waiting in the orchard. Captain Beck was there too, standing by the shed. His white t-shirt was soaked in places and clung to his chest, revealing the whorls of hair beneath. He had the axe slung casually against one shoulder. "Ah, greetings. he said. Vianne could feel Rachel's scrutiny. Beck lowered the axe. "This is a friend of yours, madame?"
"Rachel," Vianne said tightly. "My neighbor. This is Herr Captain Beck. He is the one billeting with us."
"Greetings," Beck said again, nodding politely. Vianne put a hand on Sophie's back and gave her daughter a little shove, and they were off, trudging through the tall grass of the orchard and out onto the dusty road. "He's handsome," Rachel said as they came to the airfield, which was abuzz with activity behind the coils of barbed wire. "You didn't tell me that."
"Is he?"
"I'm pretty sure you know he is, so your question is interesting. What's he like?"
"German."
"The soldiers billeted with Claire Moreau look like sausages with legs. I hear they drink enough wine to kill a judge and snore like rooting hogs. You're lucky, I guess."
"You're the lucky one, Rachel. No one has moved into your house."
"Poverty has its reward at last." She linked her arm through Vianne's. "Don't look so stricken, Vianne. I hear they have orders to be correct."
Vianne looked at her best friend. "Last week, Isabel chopped off her hair in front of the captain and said beauty must be verboten."
Rachel couldn't stifle her smile completely. "Oh."
"It's hardly funny. She could get us killed with her temper."
Rachel's smile faded. "Can you talk to her?"
"Oh, I can talk. When has she ever listened to anyone?"
"You are hurting me," Isabel said.
The man yanked her away from the wall and dragged her down the street. Moving so fast she had to run along beside him, she bumped into the stone alley wall with every step. When she tripped on a cobblestone and almost fell, he tightened his hold and held her upright.
"Think, Isabel."
He wasn't in uniform, so he must be Gestapo. That was bad. And he'd seen her defacing the poster. Did it count as an act of sabotage or espionage or resistance to the German occupation? It wasn't like blowing up a bridge or selling secrets to Britain.
"I was making art."
"It was going to be a vase full of flowers. Not a V for victory, a vase." No resistance, just a silly girl drawing on the only paper she could find. I have never even heard of General de Gaulle. And what if they didn't believe her? The man stopped in front of an oak door with a black lion's head knocker at its center. He rapped 4 times on the door.
"Where are you taking me?"
Was this a back door to the Gestapo headquarters? There were terrible rumors about these Gestapo interrogators. Supposedly they were ruthless and sadistic, but no one knew for sure. The door opened slowly, revealing an old man in a beret. A hand-rolled cigarette hung from his fleshy, liver-spotted lips. He saw Isabel and frowned.
"Open up!"
The man beside Isabel growled, and the old man stepped aside. Isabel was pulled into a room full of smoke. Her eyes stung as she looked around. It was an abandoned novelty store that had once sold bonnets and notions and sewing supplies. In the smoky light, she saw empty display cases that had been shoved up against the walls. Empty metal hat racks were piled in the corner. The window out front had been bricked up, and the back door that faced Rue La Grande was padlocked from the inside. There were 4 men in the room. A tall, graying man, dressed in rags, standing in the corner. A boy seated beside the old man who had opened the door, and a handsome young man in a tattered sweater and worn pants with scuffed boots who sat at a cafe table.
"Who is this, Didier?"
asked the old man who had opened the door. Isabel got the first good look at her captor. He was big and brawny, with the puffed-up look of a circus strongman and a heavily jowled, oversized face. She stood as tall as possible, with her shoulders pressed back and her chin lifted. She knew she looked ridiculously young in her plaid skirt and fitted blouse, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing she was afraid.
"I found her chalking V's on the German posters,"
said the swarthy man who'd caught her.
Didier. Isabel fisted her right hand, trying to rub the orange chalk away without them noticing.
"Have you nothing to say?"
said the old man standing in the corner. He was the boss, obviously. "I have no chalk."
"I saw her doing it."
Isabel took a chance. "You're not German," she said to the strong man. "You're French. I'd bet money on it. And you," she said to the old man, "you're the pork butcher." The boy she dismissed altogether, but to the handsome young man in the tattered clothes she said, "You look hungry, and I think you're wearing your brother's clothes or something you found hanging on a line somewhere. Communist." He grinned at her, and it changed his whole demeanor. But it was the man in the corner she cared about, the one in charge. She took a step toward him. "You could be Aryan. Maybe you're forcing the others to be here."
"I've known him all my life, mademoiselle," the pork butcher said. "I fought beside his father, and yours, at Somme. You're Isabelle Rossignol, oui?"
She didn't answer. Was it a trap?
"No answer," said the Bolshevik.
He rose from his seat, came toward her.
"Good for you. Why were you chalking a V on the poster?"
Again, Isabel remained silent.
"I am Henri Navarre,"
he said, close enough now to touch her.
"We are not Germans, nor do we work with them, mademoiselle."
He gave her a meaningful look.
"Not all of us are passive. Now why were you marking up their posters?"
"It was all I could think of," she said.
"Meaning?"
She exhaled evenly. "I heard de Gaulle's speech on the radio." Henri turned to the back of the room, sent a glance to the old man. She watched the two men have an entire conversation around her without speaking a word. At the end of it, she knew who the boss was, the handsome communist, Henri. At last Henri said, turning to her again,
"If you could do something more, would you?"
"What do you mean?" she asked.
"There is a man in Paris. A group, actually, from the Musée de l'Homme."
The burly man corrected him. Henri held up a hand.
"We don't say more than we must, Didier. Anyway, there is a man, a printer, risking his life to make tracts that we can distribute. Maybe if we can get the French to wake up to what is happening, we have a chance."
Henri reached into a leather bag that hung on his chair and pulled out a sheaf of papers. A headline jumped out at her. "Vive le Général de Gaulle." The text was an open letter to Maréchal Pétain that expressed criticism of the surrender. At the end it read, "Nous sommes pour le Général de Gaulle." We support Général de Gaulle.
"Well?"
Henri said quietly, and in that single word, Isabel heard the call to arms she'd been waiting for.
"Will you distribute them?"
"Me?"
"We are communists and radicals," Henri said. "They are already watching us. You are a girl, and a pretty one at that. No one would suspect you."
Isabel didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." The men started to thank her. Henri silenced them.
"The printer is risking his life by writing these tracts, and someone is risking his or her life by typing them. We are risking our lives by bringing them here. But you, Isabel, you are the one who will be caught distributing them, if you are caught. Make no mistake, this is not chalking a V on a poster. This is punishable by death."
"I won't get caught," she said. Henri smiled at that.
"How old are you?"
"Almost 19.
"Ah," he said. "And how can one so young hide this from her family?"
"My family is not the problem," Isabel said. "They pay no attention to me. But there's a German soldier billeted at my house, and I would have to break curfew."
"It will not be easy. I understand if you are afraid." Henri began to turn away.
Isabel snatched the papers back from him. "I said I'd do it." Isabel was elated. For the first time since the armistice, she wasn't completely alone in her need to do something for France. The men told her about dozens of groups like theirs throughout the country, mounting a resistance to follow de Gaulle. The more they talked, the more excited she became at the prospect of joining them. Oh, she knew she should be afraid. They told her often enough. But it was ridiculous. The Germans threatening death for handing out a few pieces of paper. She could talk her way out of it if she were caught. She was sure of it. Not that she would get caught. How many times had she sneaked out of a locked school or boarded a train without a ticket or talked her way out of trouble? Her beauty had always made it easy for her to break rules without reprisal. "When we have more, how will we contact you?" Henri asked as he opened the door to let her leave. She glanced down the street. "The apartment above Madame Lafoy's hat shop. Is it still vacant?" Henri nodded. "Open the curtains when you have papers. I'll come by as soon as I can." "Knock 4 times. If we don't answer, walk away," he said. After a pause, he added, "Be careful, Isabelle." He shut the door between them. Alone again, she looked down at her basket. Settled under a red and white checked linen cloth were the tracts. On top lay the butcher paper-wrapped ham hocks. It wasn't much of a camouflage. She would need to figure out something better. She walked down the alley and turned onto a busy street. The sky was darkening. She'd been with the men all day. The shops were closing up. The only people milling about were German soldiers and the few women who'd chosen to keep them company. The cafe tables out on the street were full of uniformed men, eating the best food, drinking the best wines. It took every ounce of nerve she had to walk slowly. The minute she was out of town, she started to run. As she neared the airfield, she was sweating and out of breath, but she didn't slow. She ran all the way into her yard. With the gate clattering shut behind her, she bent forward, gasping hard, holding the stitch in her side, trying to catch her breath. "Mademoiselle Rossignol, are you unfell?" Isabelle snapped upright. Captain Beck appeared beside her. Had he been there before her? "Captain," she said, working hard to still the racing of her heart. "A convoy went past. I rushed to get out of their way." "A convoy? I didn't see that." "It was a while back, and I am silly sometimes. I lost track of time, talking to a friend, and well..." She gave him her prettiest smile and patted her butchered hair as if it mattered to her that she looked nice for him. "How were the queues today?" "Interminable." "Please, allow me to carry your basket inside." She looked down at her basket, saw the tiniest white paper corner visible under the linen cloth. "No, I insist. We are gentlemen, you know." His long, well-manicured fingers closed around the willow handle. As he turned toward the house, she remained at his side. "I saw a large group gathering at the town hall this afternoon. What are the Vichy police doing here?" "Ah, nothing to concern you." He waited at the front door for her to open it. She fumbled nervously with the center-mounted knob, turned it, and opened the door. Although he had every right to go in at will, he waited to be invited in as if he were a guest. "Isabelle, is that you? Where have you been?" Vianne rose from the divan. "The queues were awful today." Sophie popped up from the floor by the fireplace where she'd been playing with Bébé. "What did you get today?" "Ham hocks," Isabelle said, glancing worriedly at the basket in Beck's hand. "That's all?" Vianne said sharply. "What about the cooking oil?" Sophie sank back to the rug on the floor, clearly disappointed. "I will put the hocks in the pantry," Isabelle said, reaching for the basket. "Please, allow me," Beck said. He was staring at Isabelle, watching her closely, or maybe it only felt like that. Vianne lit a candle and handed it to Isabelle. "Don't waste it. Hurry." Beck was very gallant as he walked through the shadowy kitchen and opened the door to the cellar.
Isabel went down first, lighting the way. The wooden steps creaked beneath her feet until she stepped down onto the hard-packed dirt floor and into the subterranean chill. The wooden shelves seemed to close in around them as Beck came up beside her. The candle flame sent light gamboling in front of them. She tried to still the trembling in her hand as she reached for the paper-wrapped ham hocks. She placed them on the shelf beside their dwindling supplies. "Bring up 3 potatoes and a turnip," Vianne called down. Isabel jumped a little at the sound. "You seem nervous," Beck said. "Is that the right word, mademoiselle?" The candle sputtered between them. "There were lots of dogs in town today." "The Gestapo. They love their shepherds. There is no reason for this to concern you." "I am afraid of big dogs. I was bitten once as a child." Beck gave her a smile that was stretched out of shape by the light. "Don't look at the basket." But it was too late. She saw a little more of the hidden papers sticking out. She forced a smile. "You know us girls, scared of everything." "That is not how I would describe you, mademoiselle." She reached carefully for the basket and tugged it from his grasp. Without breaking eye contact, she set the basket on the shelf, beyond the candle's light. When it was there, in the dark, she finally released her breath. They stared at each other in uncomfortable silence. Beck nodded. "And now I must away. I have only come here to pick up some papers for a meeting tonight." He turned back to the steps and began climbing them. Isabel followed the captain up the narrow stairs. When she emerged into the kitchen, Vianne was standing there with her arms crossed, frowning. "Where are the potatoes and a turnip?" Vianne asked. "I forgot." Vianne sighed. "Go," she said. "Get them." Isabel turned and went back into the cellar. After she'd gathered up the potatoes and turnip, she went to the basket, lifted the candle to expose the basket to light. There it was, the tiny white triangle of paper peeking out. She quickly withdrew the papers from the basket and shoved them into her panty girdle. Feeling the papers against her skin, she went upstairs, smiling. At supper, Isabel sat with her sister and niece, eating watery soup and day-old bread, trying to think of something to say, but nothing came to her. Sophie, who seemed not to notice, rambled on, telling one story after another. Isabel tapped her foot nervously, listening for the sound of a motorcycle approaching the house, for the clatter of German jackboots on the walkway out front, for a sharp, impersonal knock at the door. Her gaze kept cutting to the kitchen and the cellar door. "You're acting very strangely tonight," Vianne said. Isabel ignored her sister's observation. When the meal was finally over, Isabel popped out of her seat and said, "I'll do the dishes, Vi. Why don't you and Sophie finish your game of checkers?" "You'll do the dishes?" Vianne said, giving Isabel a suspicious look. "Come on, I've offered before," Isabel said. "Not in my memory." Isabel gathered the empty soup bowls and utensils. She had offered, only to keep busy, to do something with her hands. Afterward, Isabel could find nothing to do. The night dragged on. Vianne and Sophie and Isabel played belote, but Isabel couldn't concentrate. She was so nervous and excited. She made some lame excuse and quit the game early, pretending to be tired. In her upstairs bedroom, she lay atop the blankets, fully dressed, waiting. It was past midnight when she heard Beck return. She heard him enter the yard, then she smelled the smoke from his cigarette drift up. Later, he came into the house, clomping around in his boots, but by 1 o'clock, everything was quiet again. Still she waited. At 4 a.m., she got out of bed and dressed in a heavy worsted knit black sweater and plaid tweed skirt. She ripped a seam open in her summer weight coat and slid the papers inside. Then she put the coat on, tying the belt at her waist. She slipped the ration cards in her front pocket. On the way downstairs, she winced at every creak of sound.
It seemed to take forever to get to the front door, more than forever, but finally she was there, opening it quietly, closing it behind her. The early morning was cold and black. Somewhere a bird called out, his slumber probably disturbed by the opening of the door. She breathed in the scent of roses and was overcome by how ordinary it seemed in this moment. From here there would be no turning back. She walked to the still broken gate, glancing back often at the blacked-out house, expecting Beck to be there, arms crossed, booted feet in a warrior's stance, watching her. But she was alone. Her first stop was Rachel's house. There were almost no mail deliveries these days, but women like Rachel, whose men were gone, checked their letterboxes each day, hoping against hope that the mail would bring them news. Isabel reached inside her coat, felt for the slit in the silk lining, and pulled out a single piece of paper. In one movement, she opened the letterbox and slid the paper inside and quietly shut the lid. Out on the road again, she looked around and saw no one. She had done it! Her second stop was Old Man Rivet's farm. He was a communist through and through, a man of the revolution, and he'd lost a son at the front. By the time she gave away her last tract, she felt invincible. It was just past dawn. Pale sunlight gilded the limestone buildings in town. She was the first woman to queue up outside the shop this morning, and because of that, she got her full ration of butter, 150 grams for the month, 2/3 of a cup. A treasure. Chapter 11. Every day that long, hot summer, Vianne woke to a list of chores. She, along with Sophie and Isabel, replanted and expanded the garden and converted a pair of old bookcases into rabbit hutches. She used chicken wire to enclose the pergola. Now the most romantic place on the property stank of manure they collected for their garden. She took in wash from the farmer down the road, Old Man Rivet, in exchange for feed. The only time she really relaxed and felt like herself was on Sunday mornings when she took Sophie to church. Isabel refused to attend Mass, and then had coffee with Rachel, sitting in the shade of her backyard, just two best friends talking, laughing, joking. Sometimes Isabel joined them, but she was more likely to play with the children than talk with the women, which was fine with Vianne. Her chores were necessary, of course, a new way of preparing for a winter that seemed far away, but would arrive like an unwanted guest on the worst possible day. More importantly, it kept Vianne's mind occupied. When she was working in her garden, or boiling strawberries for preserves, or pickling cucumbers, she wasn't thinking of Antoine and how long it had been since she'd heard from him. It was the uncertainty that gnawed at her. Was he a prisoner of war? Was he wounded somewhere? Dead? Or would she look up one day and see him walking up this road, smiling? Missing him, longing for him, worrying about him. Those were her nighttime journeys. In a world now laden with bad news and silence, the one bit of good news was that Captain Beck had spent much of the summer away on one campaign or another. In his absence, the household settled into a routine of sorts. Isabel did all that was asked of her without complaint. It was October now, and chilly. Vianne found herself distracted as she walked home from school with Sophie. She could feel that one of her heels was coming loose, and it made her slightly unsteady. Her black kidskin Oxfords weren't made for the kind of everyday use to which they'd been put in the past few months. The sole was beginning to pull away at the toe, which often caused her to trip. The worry about replacing things like shoes was never far away. A ration card did not mean there were shoes or food to be bought. Vianne kept one hand on Sophie's shoulder, both to steady her gait and to keep her daughter close. There were Nazi soldiers everywhere, riding in lorries and on motorcycles with machine-gun-mounted sidecars. They marched in the square, their voices raised in triumphant song. A military lorry honked at them, and they moved farther onto the sidewalk as a convoy rumbled past. More Nazis.
"Is that Tante Isabelle?"
Sophie asked. Vianne glanced in the direction of Sophie's finger. Sure enough, Isabelle was coming out of an alley, clutching her basket. She looked furtive, was the only word that came to mind. Furtive. At that, a dozen little pieces clicked into place. Tiny incongruities became a pattern. Isabelle had often left Le Jardin in the wee hours of the morning, much earlier than necessary. She had dozens of long-winded excuses for absences that Vianne had barely cared about. Heels that broke, hats that flew off in the wind and had to be chased down, a dog that frightened her and blocked her way. Was she sneaking out to be with a boy?
"Tante Isabelle!"
Sophie cried out. Without waiting for a reply, or permission, Sophie darted into the street. She dodged a trio of German soldiers who were tossing a ball back and forth. "Merde," Vianne muttered. "Pardon," she said, ducking around the soldiers and striding across the cobblestone street.
"What did you get today?"
she heard Sophie ask Isabelle as her daughter reached into the willow basket. Isabelle slapped Sophie's hand, hard. Sophie yelped and drew her hand back.
"Isabelle!"
Vianne said harshly.
"What's wrong with you?"
Isabelle had the good grace to blush.
"I am sorry. It's just that I'm tired. I have been in queues all day, and for what? A veal jelly bone with barely any meat on it and a tin of milk. It's disheartening. Still, I shouldn't be rude. I'm sorry, Soph."
"Perhaps if you didn't sneak out so early in the morning, you wouldn't be tired," Vianne said.
"I'm not sneaking out,"
Isabelle said. "I'm going to the shops for food. I thought you wanted that of me. And by the way, we need a bicycle. These walks to town on bad shoes are killing me." Vianne wished she knew her sister well enough to read the look in her eyes. Was it guilt, or worry, or defiance? If she didn't know better, she'd say it was pride. Sophie linked arms with Isabelle as the three of them set off for home. Vianne studiously ignored the changes to Carrivaux, the Nazis taking up so much space, the posters on the limestone walls. The new anti-Jewish tracts were sickening, and the red and black swastika flags hanging above doorways and from balconies. People had begun to leave Carrivaux, abandoning their homes to the Germans. The rumor was that they were going to the free zone, but no one knew for sure. Shops closed and didn't reopen. She heard footsteps coming up behind her and said evenly, "Let's walk faster. Madame Mauriac, if I may interrupt."
"Good Lord, is he following you?"
Isabelle muttered. Vianne slowly turned around.
"Herr Captain,"
she said. People in the street watched Vianne closely, eyes narrowed in disapproval. "I wanted to say that I will be late tonight and will sorrowfully not be there for supper," Beck said.
"How terrible,"
Isabelle said in a voice as sweet and bitter as burnt caramel. Vianne tried to smile, but really she didn't know why he'd stopped her.
"I will save you something."
Nein, you are most kind." He fell silent. Vianne did the same. Finally, Isabelle sighed heavily.
"We are on our way home, Herr Captain."
"Is there something I can do for you, Herr Captain?" said Vianne. Beck moved closer. "I know how worried you have been about your husband, so I did some checking." "Oh." "It is not fine news. I am sorrowful to report. Your husband, Antoine Mauriac, has been captured along with many of your town's men. He is in a prisoner-of-war camp." He handed her a list of names and a stack of official postcards. "He will not be coming home." Vianne barely remembered leaving town. She knew Isabelle was beside her, holding her upright, urging her to put one foot in front of the other, and that Sophie was beside her, chirping out questions as sharp as fishhooks.
What is a prisoner of war? What did Herr Captain mean that Papa would not be coming home? Never?
Vianne knew when they'd arrived home because the scents of her garden greeted her, welcomed her. She blinked, feeling a little like someone who had just wakened from a coma to find the world impossibly changed.
Sophie,
Isabel said firmly,
go make your mother a cup of coffee. Open a tin of milk. But...
Go, Isabel said. When Sophie was gone, Isabel turned to Vianne, cupped her face with cold hands.
He'll be all right.
Vianne felt as if she were breaking apart, bit by bit, losing blood and bone as she stood here, contemplating something she had studiously avoided thinking about, a life without him. She started to shiver. Her teeth chattered.
Come inside for coffee,
Isabel said. Into the house? Their house? His ghost would be everywhere in there. A dent in the divan where he sat to read, the hook that held his coat, and the bed. She shook her head, wishing she could cry, but there were no tears in her. This news had emptied her. She couldn't even breathe. Suddenly, all she could think about was the sweater of his that she was wearing. She started to strip out of her clothes, tearing off the coat and the vest, ignoring Isabel's shouted, "No!" as she yanked the sweater over her head and buried her face in the soft wool, trying to smell him in the yarn, his favorite soap, him. But there was nothing but her own smell. She lowered the bunched-up sweater from her face and stared down at it, trying to remember the last time he'd worn it. She picked at a loose thread, and it unraveled in her hand, became a squiggly coil of wine-colored yarn. She bit it off and tied a knot to save the rest of the sleeve. Yarn was precious these days. These days. When the world was at war and everything was scarce and your husband was gone.
I don't know how to be on my own.
What do you mean? We were on our own for years. From the moment Maman died. Vianne blinked. Her sister's words sounded a little jumbled, as if they were running on the wrong speed.
You were alone,
she said.
I never was. I met Antoine when I was 14 and got pregnant at 16 and married him when I was barely 17. Papa gave me this house to get rid of me. So you see, I've never been on my own. That's why you're so strong and I'm not.
You will have to be, Isabel said.
For Sophie.
Vianne drew in a breath. And there it was. The reason she couldn't eat a bowl of arsenic or throw herself in front of a train. She took the short coil of crooked yarn and tied it to an apple tree branch. The burgundy color stood out against the green and brown. Now, each day in her garden, and when she walked to her gate and when she picked apples, she would pass this branch and see this bit of yarn and think of Antoine. Each time she would pray, to him and to God. Come home.
Come,
Isabel said, putting an arm around Vianne, pulling her close. Inside, the house echoed the voice of a man who wasn't there. Vianne stood outside Rachel's stone cottage. Overhead, the sky was the color of smoke on this cold, late afternoon. The leaves of the trees, marigold and tangerine and scarlet, were just beginning to darken around the edges. Soon they would drop to the ground. Vianne stared at the door, wishing she didn't need to be here. But she had read the names Beck had given her. Marc de Champlain was also listed. When she finally found the courage to knock, Rachel answered almost instantly, wearing an old house dress and sagging woolen stockings. A cardigan sweater hung askew, buttoned incorrectly. It gave her an odd, tilted look.
Vianne, come in. Sarah and I were just making a rice pudding. It's mostly water and gelatin, of course, but I used a bit of milk."
Vianne managed a smile. She let her friend sweep her into the kitchen and pour her a cup of the bitter ersatz coffee. That was all they could get. Vianne was remarking on the rice pudding. What she even said she didn't know. When Rachel turned and asked, "What's wrong?" Vianne stared at her friend. She wanted to be the strong one, for once, but she couldn't stop the tears that filled her eyes.
"Stay in the kitchen," Rachel said to Sarah. "If you hear your brother wake up, get him."
"You," she said to Vianne,
"come with me."
She took Vianne by the arm and guided her through the small salon and into Rachel's bedroom. Vianne sat on the bed and looked up at her friend. Silently, she held out the list of names she'd gotten from Beck. "They're prisoners of war, Rachel. Antoine and Mark and all the others. They won't be coming home." 3 days later, on a frosty Saturday morning, Vianne stood in her classroom and stared out at the group of women seated in desks that were too small for them. They looked tired and a little wary. No one felt comfortable gathering these days. It was never clear exactly how far verboten extended into conversations about the war, and besides that, the women of Carriveau were exhausted. They spent their days standing in line for insufficient quantities of foods, and when they weren't in line, they were foraging the countryside or trying to sell their dancing shoes or a silk scarf for enough money to buy a loaf of good bread. In the back of the room, tucked into the corner, Sophie and Sarah were leaning against each other, knees drawn up, reading books. Rachel moved her sleeping son from one shoulder to the other and closed the door of the classroom.
"Thank you all for coming. I know how difficult it is these days to do anything more than the absolutely necessary."
There was a murmuring of agreement among the women.
"Why are we here?"
Madame Fournier asked tiredly. Vianne stepped forward. She had never felt completely comfortable around some of the women, many of whom had disliked Vianne when she moved here at 14. When Vianne had caught Antoine, the best-looking young man in town, they'd liked her even less. Those days were long past, of course, and now Vianne was friendly with these women and taught their children and frequented their shops. But even so, the pains of adolescence left a residue of discomfort.
"I have received a list of French prisoners of war from Carriveau. I am sorry, terribly sorry to tell you that your husbands, and mine and Rachel's, are on the list. I am told they will not be coming home."
She paused, allowing the women to react. Grief and loss transformed the faces around her. Vianne knew the pain mirrored her own. Even so, it was difficult to watch, and she found her eyes misting again. Rachel stepped close, took her hand.
"I got us postcards," Vianne said. "Official ones, so we can write to our men."
"How did you get so many postcards?"
Madame Fournier asked, wiping her eyes.
"She asked her German for a favor,"
said Helene Ruel, the baker's wife.
"I did not, and he's not my German," Vianne said. "He's a soldier who has requisitioned my home. Should I just let the Germans have Le Jardin? Just walk away and have nothing? Every house or hotel in town with a spare room has been taken by them. I am not special in this."
More tusking and murmurs. Some women nodded, others shook their heads.
"I would have killed myself before I let one of them move into my house,"
Helene said.
"Would you, Helene? Would you really?"
Vianne said.
"And would you kill your children first or throw them into the street to survive on their own?"
Helene looked away.
"They have taken over my hotel," a woman said, "and they are gentlemen for the most part. A bit crude, perhaps, wasteful."
"Gentlemen,"
Helene spat the word.
"We are pigs to the slaughter. You will see, pigs who put up no fight at all." "I haven't seen you at my butcher shop recently," Madame Fournier said to Vianne in a judgmental voice.
"My sister goes for me,"
Vianne said. She knew this was the point of their disapproval.
They were afraid that Vian would get and take special privileges that they would be denied. "I would not take food or anything from the enemy." She felt suddenly as if she were back in school, being bullied by the popular girls. "Vian is trying to help," Rachel said sternly enough to shut them up. She took the postcards from Vian and began handing them out. Vian took a seat and stared down at her own blank postcard. She heard the chicken scratching of other pencils on other postcards, and slowly she began to write. "My beloved Antoine, we are well. Sophie is thriving, and even with so many chores, we found some time this summer to spend by the river. I think of you with every breath and pray you are well. Do not worry about us and come home. Je t'aime, Antoine." Her lettering was so small she wondered if he would even be able to read it, or if he would get it, or if he was alive. For God's sake, she was crying. Rachel moved in beside her, laid a hand on her shoulder. "We all feel it," she said quietly. Moments later, the women rose one by one. Wordlessly, they shuffled forward and gave Vian their postcards. "Don't let them hurt your feelings," Rachel said. "They're just scared." "I'm scared too," Vian said. Rachel pressed her postcard to her chest. Her fingers splayed across the small square of paper, as if she needed to touch each corner. "How can we not be?" Afterward, when they returned to Le Jardin, Beck's motorcycle with the machine gun-mounted sidecar was parked in the grass outside the gate. Rachel turned to her. "Do you want us to come in with you?" Vian appreciated the worry in Rachel's gaze, and she knew that if she asked for help she would get it. But how was she to be helped? "No, merci, we are fine. He has probably forgotten something and will soon leave again. He is rarely here these days." "Where is Isabel?" "A good question. She sneaks out every Friday morning before the sunrise." She leaned closer, whispered, "I think she is meeting a boy." "Good for her." To that, Vian had no answer. "Will he mail the postcards for us?" Rachel asked. "I hope so." Vian stared at her friend a moment longer. Then she said, "Well, we will know soon enough," and led Sophie into the house. Once inside, she instructed Sophie to go upstairs to read. Her daughter was used to such directives, and she didn't mind. Vian tried to keep her daughter and Beck separated as much as possible. He was seated at the dining room table with papers spread out in front of him. At her entrance, he looked up. A drop of ink fell from the tip of his fountain pen, landed in a blue starburst on the white sheet of paper in front of him. "Madame, most excellent, I am pleased you are returned." She moved forward cautiously, holding the packet of postcards tightly. They'd been tied up with a scrap of twine. "I have some postcards here, written by friends in town, to our husbands, but we don't know where to send them. I hoped perhaps you could help us." She shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, feeling acutely vulnerable. "Of course, madame. I would be pleased to do this favor for you, although it will take much time and research to accomplish." He rose politely. "As it happens, I am now concocting a list for my superiors at the commandanture. They need to know the names of some of the teachers at your school." "Oh," she said, uncertain as to why he would tell her this. He never spoke of his work. Of course, they didn't speak often about anything. "Jews, communists, homosexuals, Freemasons, Jehovah's Witnesses. Do you know these people?" "I am Catholic, Herr Captain, as you know. We do not speak of such things at school. I hardly know who are homosexuals and Freemasons at any rate." "Ah, So you know the others?
I don't understand.
I am unclear. My pardons. I would appreciate it most sternly if you would let me know the names of the teachers in your school who are Jewish or communist.
Why do you need their names?
It is clerical, merely. You know us Germans. We are list makers.
He smiled and pulled a chair out for her. Vianne stared down at the blank paper on the table, then at the postcards in her hand. If Antoine received one, he might write back. She might know at last if he was alive.
This is not secret information, Herr Captain. Anyone can give you these names.
He moved in close to her.
With some effort, madame. I believe I can find your husband's address and mail a package for you also. Would this be sanguine?
Sanguine is not the right word, Herr Captain. You mean to ask me if it would be all right.
She was stalling, and she knew it. Worse, she was pretty sure that he knew it.
Ah, thank you so much for tutoring me in your beautiful language. My apologies.
He offered her a pen.
Do not worry, madame. It is clerical, merely.
Vianne wanted to say that she wouldn't write down any names, but what would be the point? It was easy enough for him to get this information in town. Everyone knew whose names belonged on the list, and Beck could throw her out of her own house for such a defiance. And what would she do then? She sat down and picked up the pen and began to write down names. It wasn't until the end of the list that she paused and lifted the pen tip from the paper.
I'm done,
she said in a soft voice.
You have forgotten your friend.
Did I?
Surely you meant to be accurate.
She bit her lip nervously and looked down at the list of names. She was certain suddenly that she shouldn't have done this. But what choice did she have? He was in control of her home. What would happen if she defied him? Slowly, feeling sick to her stomach, she wrote the last name on the list. Rachel de Champlain,